Thank you very much. And what Gail didn't mention is that she was one of my PhD supervisors, and so nobody has read more edits about the Edinburgh Public Dispensary, including some very rough early versions. So thank you for being willing to listen to yet more talk on that subject. So disclaimer to start off with, as Gail mentioned, we will have three very interesting historians, but I'm afraid you have to put up with me first. I am doing the sort of nuts and bolts of this resource. So before we get into the fantastic context of it, this is just about what we are actually launching today, what the excuse is to have cake, and how that resource works, and how you can use it if you are interested in the history of medicine. Fantastic. So this image is on display in one of these cases. It is the only image that I have been able to find of the Edinburgh Public Dispensary, just to demonstrate what the physical building itself looked like. And very little of it actually survives. Slightly strangely, there's a part of the sort of the facade that is in a University of Edinburgh building, just sort of in the corridor, which I happened to come across and thought, oh, that looks very familiar. So it's slightly hidden away, but the rest of the building no longer exists. It was knocked down because of some restructuring that was being done in Edinburgh's Old Town. So I've got a picture up here, but he's actually also on the wall just over there. That is Andrew Duncan. So as Gail mentioned, the founder of the dispensary, they are his case notes. But we did decide that when we were presenting this as a resource, we really wanted to focus on the patients. That's why it's called the People's Dispensary and not Notes of Andrew Duncan. But you can see how Andrew Duncan, he did many things. He was a professor at the University of Edinburgh. He played a key role in the foundation of the Royal Edinburgh Hospital. He was one of the very earliest teachers in the world on the subject of forensic medicine and was a big innovator in that field. But you can tell how proud he was of the dispensary by the fact that his portrait here, you can see a picture of the dispensary hanging in the background. So of all the things that he achieved, this was the one that he obviously wanted to be part of his legacy. These are, by the way, to the best of my knowledge, the only surviving 18th century dispensary case notes anywhere in the UK. They are a very unique collection, not just for what they tell you about Edinburgh, but what they tell you about dispensaries. So there are various dispensaries that have patient ledgers, and those tend to be quite formulaic with not very much information. So you'll have a row that says admitted on this date and so on. But having a record where each patient gets 2 or 3, at least, if not a dozen pages of description of who they are, their symptoms, their treatment, that kind of level of detail, as far as I know, does not exist anywhere else. And part of the reason why these records are so detailed is because when Andrew Duncan set up the dispensary, he set it up as a teaching dispensary. So it wasn't just about treating patients, it was also bringing in students and teaching them based on kind of treating and studying those patients. So it's because he had that purpose that's why he developed the level of detail that he did in the notes that he kept. So this is the resource itself. The web address is at the top, but don't worry, you don't have to memorize it. By the door, there are People's Dispensary postcards that have the URL on the back, so it has the nice picture of the dispensary and the URL. So pick up one of these so that you have the link and information about the resource. But this is what it looks like. We used, just an insight, it doesn't really matter, but we used the coloring from his portrait for this, so that's why the color scheme looks like it does. And just to talk you through a little bit about what you can see in front of you. So for those of you who've used our collections before, including our online collections, it might look a little bit familiar because we have mirrored our Cullen Project website. So we very intentionally used the same metadata, the same way of tagging, and make it easier to use, but also with the idea that a bit further down the line, we're going to bring all those digital resources together into one mega resource. And so we very intentionally kind of prepared ourselves for that. So you'll see on the homepage a few statistics. There are 1,372 patients. There are more individual cases than that, but if you imagine some patients are coming back for repeat visits, so that's 1,372 individuals. 174 practitioners, which you wouldn't necessarily think in patient records, but because Duncan was using these for teaching purposes, he would talk about previous treatment that that patient had had from another practitioner, or he'd read a book by somebody that he thought was important. Most of the practitioners are men, but there are some women in there. There are some healers that he talks about that he's aware of working in Edinburgh and so on. So it's not just about the patients. You can also find out quite a bit about surgeons, physicians, apothecaries, and healers with this resource. And as it says there are over 10,000 individual pages. So that's 10,000 pages which are fully transcribed, indexed, which means they're fully searchable. So you don't have to wade through 10,000 pages. You can go in and search for the word syphilis or hysteria and see what comes up. If you search for your surname, see if there's anyone out there with the same name. That's an arrow pointing at what I just said. On the sidebar there, this is where you can easily access some of the diseases. So we just selected some of our favorite diseases to list there, but you can see that you can access the collection via searching by disease, symptom, treatment, and body part. So there's lots of different ways that you can access this collection. So I'm just going to go through the tabs along the top there just to explain what those are. So probably the most important thing from the About Us section is the thank you to all of the people who were involved in helping us to transcribe this collection. We very much appreciate their efforts, but there's also just information about the collection, how to find out more about us, and about our funders. So as Gail mentioned, this was fully funded by others than the Royal College. So the digitisation was funded by the Wellcome Trust. The development of the database was funded by our fellows and members, and the Meyer Sim Committee paid for our cake here today. So we appreciate all of our funders and what they have done for us. The next tab is a patient, so it's about how to use this resource if you're interested in genealogy. Of course, there are lots of names, both of practitioners and of patients. The other thing that you might not necessarily think about, this is really good for, is occupations. So they didn't always record every patient's occupation, but they did record a lot of them. So if you are interested in occupational health or the history of certain professions, this is a really good resource for that as well. You can find out a lot about how their work impacted on their health. So we have servants, labourers, blacksmiths. My two favourite occupations, which are quite Edinburgh specific, are water carrier, so people who delivered water to the very, very high tenements in the old town, and chairman. And chairmen were not chairman of the board, they were sedan chairmen, so their job was to carry the wealthy people round the old town's little winding streets in their sedan chairs. So a real insight into occupational health. The next tab, using the case books. There's information about the dispensary itself if you want to find out a bit more about how it worked, how it operated. Information about Andrew Duncan, and a glossary of the weird apothecary symbols that you will find scattered throughout. It took us quite a while to figure them out, so you don't have to. The next bit is Georgian medicine. So like this event today, putting it all into a bit of context. Another thing that you can find in the case notes that you might not necessarily have thought of is there is a chunk about domestic medicine. So Duncan did like to record when somebody had previously got treatment. So he would say, there's one where a child was told to rub butter in their eyes by one of their neighbours, and he was quite, scoffing about that. But he liked to record. If people had tried things at home before they came into the dispensary, they would be recorded as well. So you get an insight into some domestic recipes and domestic medicine through this resource as well. And this is when we get into the proper bit, where actually all the real information is. So you can browse the collection in lots of different ways, and you can see them all listed here. You can browse by the name of the patient. It's organized alphabetically by surname. You can browse by body part, condition, symptom, or treatment. You can browse by practitioner, and you can browse by archive reference as well. So this is what it looks like when you get into it. Alphabetical list of all of the patients. Where there are multiple spellings of a person's name, we put both of them in there. So if you are trying to find someone, when you are searching or when you are browsing, you can find them even if their name is misspelt. Alphabetical list of all of the body parts, conditions, symptoms, and treatments. We've got a description for each one. Obviously, that helps to explain it, but it also helps with searching as well. So if you're searching for pregnancy, it will also come up with abortion. So it helps you to find information. If there are historic terms in the description, we'll put the modern version so that it'll be easier for you to find it. You can browse all of them together, or you can select a specific one. So just look at symptoms, just look at treatments, that kind of thing. And when you've done that, you click on any one of those. This is what you get. So a list of all of the records along with the description. Yes, and then you can see for practitioners, again, almost all of the practitioners, we've been able to figure out who they are, and we put contextual description. So it's not just a list of names. You can see who was a surgeon, who was a physician, where they lived. If you're specifically interested in German surgeons, you can find that information on here. And this is by reference number. Now, obviously that's helpful if you know what the reference number is, but the other reason why this bit is useful is because it shows you the order in which they are in the volume. So if you're curious to know what comes after what order they're in, is it the start or the end of a volume, you use this to figure that out. And the final thing is the search. So it's basically like a Google search. It indexes all of the records that are in there, as well as all the descriptions I showed you. You search and you find the records. And this is what you get when you click on any one of the individual records. So this is an individual patient record. And it has, and Gail mentioned this before, that it defaults to what we're calling normalized, which is another way of saying fixed or readable. The way that Andrew Duncan wrote was a horrible shorthand. I spent way too much of my life staring at it so that you don't have to, but it is tricky. So there's a normalized version that you can then sort of reasonably, legibly read. All of the diseases, practitioners, things like that are all tagged, so you can click on one of them to see every other record with that practitioner's name, that kind of thing. Yeah, you can see those all tagged there. We do have the transcript, so it defaults to normalized, but if you want to see the horrendous way of writing, you're welcome to. If you distrust our normalized version, you can have a look at that. I wouldn't recommend it unless you're feeling like you want a challenge, so this is just pretty much everything is shorthand. That's affection depends on a specific contagion, but yeah, it'll take you a little while to read through all of that. That is very much the writing style. And the final thing which you get is the original document. So if you want to actually go back and look at the original documents, they're very high resolution. You can click on any one of them. You can read it yourself. It's definitely high enough resolution that you can read it. You can, download it. You can, within reason, do whatever you want with it. So we've given you an easy-to-use version that's searchable, but if you want to go back to the very original, you can do that as well. So that's basically it. I realize it's not very exciting revelations, but this is the resource that we have developed. I hope you find it useful. Thank you.